Welcome to The Making of Me. Today we will explore modern society's improvements in knowledge and acceptance of the transgender community. We've all been in a situation where we feel like the odd one out, but imagine having these thoughts your entire life. With there now being 7,431 people transitioned in the UK, there is no better time than the present to educate our young people in today's society about the trans community. By following the lives of two transgender people born in completely different generations, we can find out just how much society has improved the facilities and support offered to the transgender community. Jenny Ann Bishop, previously known as Paul, is a 70-year-old trans woman living in Rhyl, North Wales. We visited Jenny Ann to find out just what it was like to grow up in a generation where transgender wasn't understood by society.
I knew that my perception of my gender was completely different to the sex I'd been assigned at birth, and I was always thinking as a youngster, one morning I'll grow up, I'll wake up and my body will be just like my sister's, and my parents will say, oh well, we had a girl, not a boy. And I had those feelings from about 3 or 4 years old. And at 6, I got sent to a psychiatrist.
We also visited 18-year-old Alfie Tyler Nikitas, previously known as Anastasia Emma, a trans man living with his family in Harpenden, to find out how society has improved for someone like himself to grow up as trans in modern society.
I always remember I was the boy in everything. And it just fitted, it just suited me. I didn't think too much about, because I didn't really see myself as much as a girl then, because of the fact that, you know, you haven't gone through puberty or anything like that, so everyone's kind of the same. But I know that it always bothered me that I wasn't like the other boys. So, you know, some nights we'd go out and play football, and I knew that there was just something that wasn't the same. It wasn't the same as all the other boys. And I think that was probably about 6, 7 when I knew that it wasn't right. It just wasn't.
We went to visit Dr. Mark Widowson, a lecturer in counselling and psychotherapy at the University of Salford, to find out just what gender dysphoria actually means and what treatment and facilities are offered to people living with the condition.
Dysphoria basically means unhappiness. It's a sort of ancient Greek word that we sort of use nowadays, and what this is referring to in this context is a sense of unhappiness about your gender, or more specifically the gender that you were assigned at birth. So typically what gender dysphoria means when we think about it in a sort of wider sense is this is talking about people who get a sense that their actual gender, the gender that they are inside, does not match their genitals or the gender that they were given when they were born.
I spent most of my childhood trying to be the person my parents wanted to be, but secretly being myself. And when I could, I would be at home on my own and I'd present as Jenny Ann, and I always felt much happier. And when I went to university, I explored transitioning, and everybody said, no, that's not something people do. Find yourself a girlfriend, get married, have a family, and all these feelings will go away. And of course they don't, because particularly when the children started coming along, I felt quite maternal, and I felt I wanted to be a woman in the family as well as my wife. And it was quite difficult living with what I saw as another woman and not being the person I am.
The doctor said about my hormone levels weren't right. So we got in the car and I said, Mum, you know, the doctor said I had wrong hormone levels. And I said, well, I think I'm transgender. She said, okay, that's it, kept driving. I said, well, you're not going to say anything else? She said, well, I knew already. I just was like, what?
Although Alfie's family was extremely supportive of his decision, during his transition there was one thing Alfie's dad found hard to come to terms with.
Even though he called me, he can call me he, He could refer to me as his son. He just struggled with the name change. Like, for him, it was just hard. It's just because, you know, he gave me that name when he held me for the first time, and it's something that he's got to take his time to let go of. For every trans person, when they tell their parents, I think you've got to be ready to pack your stuff up and leave.
Part of the reason why I didn't transition was because I didn't have that support. My family were very much against me, so my ex and my children don't talk to me. My sister and my cousin were supportive, and so was my granddaughter. And I transitioned in 2007, and that made me very happy.
I'd like to think of myself as quite a strong person, and I'd like to think that I could go through it 50 years ago. But actually, in reality, I don't think I could.
It was very different growing up as a trans person in the 40s, 50s, early 60s, because there was very little information.
People are much more open and receptive to talking about it, and that's a massive difference in itself.
The amount of media coverage, especially, has just been, it's been incredible.
When Caitlyn Jenner came out, she got fantastically positive headlines. Now, her life is nothing like the average trans man or trans woman, but she's done us a huge favour by getting those positive stories out there. And it's that positive image and education that will change things.
Jenny Ann and her partner Ellen run a community house next door to their home in North Wales, where transgender people can stay and be offered support during or after their transition.
We bought the house because we'd been trying to get the housing associations to look after trans people who were homeless. Because very often when you come out to your family or you transition, they reject you, and particularly young people we know are thrown on the streets for being trans or LGBT. Some of the first visitors we had was a young trans guy who was made homeless and was literally wandering the streets in Rhyl when he asked could he come and stay with us, and he stayed until the local housing association found him a flat. And then the person who we've sort of adopted as a daughter, who was transitioning in prison, came and stayed for her home leave prior to being released, so she could get used to being in the community. And when she was released, she came and stayed in the community house. And also we'd lost our meeting place, hadn't we?
Well, we have used it one times for that. I think the main use for the community has been for trans girls who've had their surgery and haven't got anyone to look after them. Particularly if they're living on their own in a flat, like Joan, who was living in a flat upstairs, and well, after sort of fairly extensive surgery, you can't really do a lot
for yourself.
And they come and stay here for a few weeks. One of them was about 2 months, I think, stayed at the end.
Yes.
And we can help them and with shopping and all sorts of things like that.
Yes, and we're aware of what can go wrong after that type of surgery, and also we're linked up so they can go to the local medical centre and they register as a visitor. And very often people get infections after having the surgery and need to go and see the GP and get an antibiotic, rather than them having to go all the way to London to get it fixed. It was for my work in Wales that I got my OBE. Since I retired, I've been able to spend most of my time working in the community, and the organisations I particularly work with, the Unique Transgender Network here in North Wales, our group Transforum Manchester in Manchester, which does the same, and we've also helped set up a group in South Wales in Cardiff called Trans Social Meetup Group. I also work with the Welsh Health Specialist Services to sort out the gender care pathway in Wales, and that's a long ongoing job. And one I really enjoy, I work with the British Transport Police, the Railway Police.
34% of transgender people have attempted suicide at least once as an adult. 14% of transgender people attempted suicide more than twice as an adult.
If it sometimes happens as a trans suicide, then we advise how to deal with the press and how to work with the family of the person who's died.
47% of transgender people do not use public social or leisure facilities because of fear of discriminatory treatment.
I've had hate crime and discrimination too many times to remember, and it's partly why I do some of the work I do. I got outed in the 1970s by the police for being trans.
I started dating this girl about 2 years ago. She was looks-wise way too good for me anyway. Like, my friends even said, you know, you're the only boy here without a dick and you've got the best looking girlfriend. And next minute I wasn't allowed round anymore. See, it was the dad that didn't like me. He basically stopped her from seeing me. He said, you're not allowed to see him anymore. Well, he called me her, even though he didn't even know. He didn't ever meet me, like, pre-transition.
22% of transgender people required to use the toilets of their former gender at work, whilst transitioning and living through their real-life experience.
Every time they found out at work about my trans status in my private life, I'd lose my job and have to start all over again. And then, yet again in 2008, I lost my job because somebody at work was very transphobic and wouldn't work with me. And instead of him being censored, I lost my job.
My friends they've been everything to me. They've been like the reason why I can go through what I've been through.
You have to try and come out as young as you can, because the longer you leave it, the more difficult it becomes and the more likely it is to influence other people.
50 years ago I wouldn't have been able to do it, and anyone that has been able to do it, I credit them for it.
If I could have transitioned as a young person, my life would have been a lot easier, and so would the life of my partner and my children. Do go along to your local support group. That's the first place to start.